universe do you live in?
Oh, thank you.
Are we ready?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great. Good noon, everyone. It is Wednesday, the 14th of September. We're gathered for our finance meeting. And today in the boardroom, we have members Higgins, Holloman, Jacobs, member Lessons, myself. It's my understanding the board president Bellamy will be coming after she finishes up with the local community council. And then hopefully we will receive other members online. And I'm just going to go, we have some guests from the administration and our allies, our teammates. So we could go around the room and introduce ourselves for the record real quick.
Yeah, I'm Meredith Basteris with Internal Audit.
Mike Chadwick with Internal Audit.
Jim Anderson, CFO.
Jeff Bryant, Superintendent.
Rob Holland, acting COO.
And in the back, we have Kathy Moff. Oh,
I'm a community member interested in the meeting.
great.
David Communications.
Aurora, Senior Director of Finance.
Corey's teacher.
Great. Okay, we have 3 items on our agenda today. The first item is our P card audit. So I will let our auditors take over. Thank you, Meredith and Mike.
Thank you. As we introduced ourselves previously, my name is Mike Chadwick. This is Meredith. She is newer to ASD. I think this is her first meeting with you all. So this is our P card audit that we were asked to conduct. We've done this in the past. I think this may be third, second, I don't know.
At least the third P card audit.
Third P card audit. Just want to emphasize on page 2 of this report, we have the overall evaluation. We have our first sentence. Overall, most employees complied with district policies and procedures regarding the use of P cards. This is not a sentence that we typically put in an audit report. In other words, we don't typically start off with something good. Given the nature and size of ASD, ASD is a big organization with a lot of activities occurring. Most employees are doing what they need to do with P cards. However, we did find some areas for improvement. We have finding 1 at the bottom of page 2, where we have conditional purchases were not always approved prior to the purchases being made. For example, we found that some gift cards did not have a conditional approval prior to the purchase being made. Some of the gift card purchases may have been denied if conditional approval had been sought in advance. Finding 2, and I need to back up. In each one of these findings and recommendations, management was very responsive to the findings and recommendations. And not only were they responsive, they got the response back to us in time, which sometimes is unusual, not for ASD, but for other organizations. Finding 2, we had some transactions split to circumvent the dollar limits. The P card holders have a dollar threshold that they can make purchases, say up to $2,500. In some cases, the limit when the purchase was made, say the purchase may have been for $3,000. Well, they said, well, put it on 2 transactions, $2,500 here and $500 here. They're not supposed to do that.
There's one more thing with that surprised me. It may have happened before, but I had not seen it. And that was when they have their P card on file with a vendor, the vendor just ran it twice, where the AA may not even have realized that they were doing a split purchase. So we know that we have to address that separately, and we have already through on the radar, but that's something that we have to add to the training so people are aware that those things can happen, or you thought you ordered one thing from Amazon and the quantity was wrong and it processed. So yeah, that one kind of caught me by surprise. As soon as they brought it up, as soon as she found it, we could see how it could happen. But we had not addressed that in previous training.
Yeah, that's a good point. For example, one of the purchases that we found was one high school had $4,400 they purchased for flag uniforms. They split it into 2 purchases. Finding 3.
And to be clear, what they should have done is a PR. That's what you're supposed to do. Or get your credit card limit increased and they can ask for that. But not asking and not trying to find the fix and put the right thing in place is what Meredith was looking for.
Thank you. Finding 3, at the bottom of page 4, we had personal purchases using the P card were not always reimbursed. And we identified 23 of 96 personal transactions. They didn't total a whole lot, but they hadn't been reimbursed. However, during the course of the audit, most of those personal P card transactions were reimbursed. And I don't think for a lot of these that it was an intentional. It was perhaps they got mixed up. For example, they may have been on Amazon and they bought something and they used the wrong credit card. Something like that may have happened. I don't know, Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The other thing we did late last year, and it wasn't in effect for this whole audit period, was change the P card. We did a contest where student art was used and we changed all the P cards because frankly, 4 or 5 years ago, my Alaska Airlines card looked exactly like at 5 in the morning, the district P card. And I may have bought gas and had to immediately go to my people when I realized what I had done and pay it real quick. And so it was for a while, the card looked so much alike that there were accidents. So we made a really colorful art by elementary students, and that made a huge
That
difference.
made a big difference.
Once we started rolling those out, but we still have work to do. And it's really just talking to our employees and letting them know that what the rules are.
Yeah, and I think that was a real creative solution because when you pull that card out, you think, that can't be my card. That colorful artwork that might have sticking in. So it helped. Finding 4, this was, we found a few prohibited transactions around contracted transportation. In our previous audit, we actually found quite a few more. So this is a big improvement regarding prohibited transactions. Not very many. When you think of the number of transactions that that the ASD has and the dollar value, this is very few prohibited transactions. Finding 5, this is donations that were made using P cards to agencies not included on the district's charitable giving campaign list or not approved by an appropriate instructional division senior director. And we found 5 of those. Not large dollar value, but nonetheless, they're supposed to be on that approved list.
One of the challenges with this is students, like when the Ukraine invasion occurred, students go out and do a fundraiser with the specific intent of donating it to this organization. And frankly, not every sponsor understood what about the charitable giving list. And we haven't updated it in the last year. We are going to put some effort into that and making sure that we fix the list and make it better. But all they really had to do was send an email in. Elementary or secondary directors would have looked at the organization, and if it was valid, they would have said yes. It really was an easy fix of ask first, and in those few cases, it just slipped past that.
Yeah. Our finding 6 at the top of page 8, we had that we had procurement card purchases were not always approved within 7 business days. And we found it took an average of 8 days. Now that's an average, 8 days versus 7 days. But on average, there were some that were higher. This is actually a little bit of an improvement too from the previous audit report. Doing better. So, Jim,
Yeah, this continues to be a struggle. the second they swipe the card, we've already paid.
Mhm.
But to get everything linked up and match and to be able to account for everything, they need to approve it. And so we're gonna work with, it really is district level leadership at director level and at schools to make sure that we look at the process to see if there's a way we can streamline that to make it cleaner. And we'll have something by this spring to start floating by the principals. The one lesson we have learned about P cards and the reason they have gotten better is we do talk to principals before we implement changes. That didn't happen as much when I first got here. I think we're a much stronger team on making sure that, for one, they understand it better if you get their input and talk it through with them, but they also know better how to enforce it. So we will work on this piece this spring.
Yeah, there is an improvement here. It's important. It helps keeps the district's financial reporting up to date and current. Finding 7, this is dealing with Amazon Prime memberships. And while the intent may be good to get a Prime membership, we found that there were a lot of memberships bought or purchased, and sometimes these memberships were purchased at the same school. When you could have just said, hey, one person has a membership and we all use the membership instead of 2 or 3 people having memberships all at the same school. So we found quite a few of these, and there's ways that can be centralized and have just one membership purchased for the entire school or for just down here at the administration building, instead of having 3 or 4, kind of like at home. If you're at home, your significant other purchases a membership, you said, I just purchased one last week. Now we have 2. Kind of the same type of thing. Let's see over here.
So having lived that experience. The thought is, and I agree, like having multiple memberships is kind of a waste of money. The hard part is that then everybody's P card is in the one account. So I don't know how to, like, it seems like there should be if you want that, we should have parameters on how to set that up, who is responsible for that account, and who, like a chart, if my P card is in there, anyway, you know the dynamic.
Yeah.
Well, the Amazon Prime business account, which we do have people using, and Aurora's been working with schools. In fact, we've activated new Amazon business accounts. One thing that gets lost is Meredith and Mike have been talking to us for about 2.5 months. When they audit us, they don't wait till the morning of the finance committee meeting and say, surprise. They bring these things up as they're finding them. And so we've been working that. And when you do the Amazon business account, those schools who have started making that transition, it accounts for that. So you have multiple different people using it. Right, we don't share passwords, so you wouldn't share that. And it allows,
Log into the same business account then.
but you only have to pay for one account.
Right.
It
No,
just
I get
allows, like, one of ours is for 100 people. And it allows up to 100 people to go off of this business account, but we only have to pay for the one business account. But you're not going to share P card numbers with other people. So of course, that's not the way it's set up.
Thanks for addressing that.
That's the findings and recommendations that we have in the report. Like I said, they were very responsive. Like Jim said, we talk with them months ahead of time. They already know what we're finding and are working on addressing these things. At the back of the report, we have several attachments that just gives some statistics that people have been interested in the past, like who makes these purchases, what vendors are we using, these types of things. And so we just kind of summarize those in the back. People just found interesting before. And that's our report. Right now, just to give you an update, we're working on the audit of the food warehouse. And we've done some of our preliminary work, now doing what we call our field work, where we're digging a little bit deeper into the areas that we thought were the most interesting or could have effects that are important. So we're working on that right now.
Thank you for the report. I sincerely appreciate your diligence, and I'll just say open the floor to questions from any board members.
Let me just
Higgins?
make one comment. I remember when they went with the P cards back in 2010, I think it was. after an audit, and they talked about how much money they were saving, it's like $500,000 a year compared to the bureaucracy of what was involved in buying every little item. And it cut back a lot. So these findings are not alarming to me relative to the benefits of the P card that it contribute to the reduction of operational costs. So a little bit of background in regards to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think purchasing would agree with you.
And I hope that your current audit is not interesting at all. Nobody likes it. Nope. Yes, Amy.
And I was gonna say, having been a victim of the previous process, and I should say, with a mea culpa, I am one of those people that filled up their motorhome with gasoline one night. And 12 hours later, Katie was on the phone to me and it all got wrapped up really quickly. But yeah, you gotta be careful what you do in the dark with the people. But this has made it so that a lot of employees don't carry a burden of either having to buy something and wait a month or go through a paperwork process that's costly to them and the district and everything. The first time this audit came out, there was kind of a reaction from a lot of people like, oh, look at all these problems. It's like, well, those problems were there before, they were just hidden. And now you can actually do summaries and analysis. The other interesting thing would be the number of purchases, just the gross number of purchases that get made. People get, and maybe it's in there, I missed it.
I think it's on the intro page.
But people forget how much this organization buys and how frequently people have to buy it. And far less of it comes out of teachers' pockets now, just because there's a process where you can do something in a reasonable amount of time without just deciding putting up the money. So I really support it. And as Member Higgins said, the mistakes are going to happen and the audit's necessary. But yeah, there's nothing alarming to me.
Can I make two comments? Regarding the number of transactions, from March 1st, 2021 to the end of February 2022, there were 46,547 transactions, total for a process of $10.6 million. There's a
That's
lot.
only a couple hundred a day.
And then to another one of your points, I think it's important to do this audit or to periodically do this audit because it sends a message that someone is looking and someone it's important. I think if we had just done the first audit years ago and then said, that was it, we're never going to look at this again, I think you probably would have some more significant issues. But because they know that someone will be looking, they'll think, well, should I make this purchase? Or, oh, someone said something about split purchases. I don't think I can do this. So I think it's important to periodically do this audit just to let people know that someone is watching and someone is looking.
Just quick comment. I worked in purchasing 25 years ago. It was a long time ago. And that was back when every school was relying on purchasing to get every pen, every pencil. So the P card process, me hearing about that was like, oh my God, that's wonderful. The schools have accessibility to what they need when they need it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this process.
Great.
Okay,
Well, let's go to the second item on today's agenda, FY24 budget updates.
Okay, so the one update I have is, we've been briefing the board now every 2 weeks, and we'll brief you again on Tuesday. We've also been briefing the principals in July and at the general leadership meeting today, at the conclusion of the finance meeting, we've been doing small group breakouts. So in the past, when budget deficits were pretty small, we would always invite principal leadership in and some other groups. But when you're looking at $68 million plus, we knew that we needed to, when we talk transparency, it's not just to the school board, it's to the staff, it's to the principals, it's to the community, it's everybody. So we've been bringing the principals in and we briefed them once this morning with everything we briefed last Tuesday. And then we've been having 45-minute sessions with small groups as they come in, and you'll see around the room, there's 8 different poster board things set up. And we talked to them for about 20-30 minutes, get their input, feedback and comments. And then on the sticky notes, they put all kinds of things from programs they think should be reduced or increased. Because as we go through this, and we're not there yet in the budget discussions, but you're going to start seeing in just a matter of a few meetings, student outcome data attached to those programs. Because at the end of the day, you prioritize on the mission, and the mission is educating students. And sometimes you may actually invest more money in a program that's working while reducing programs that you can't validate that they are working, and add that in with direct feedback and input from principals on what they value most on top of the community surveys. Because it's different, when we brief the principals, when you're briefing people, you're talking to people, you're not talking with people, right? And so today's effort, and it's pretty much all day, other than the 1 hour kickoff for the briefing piece, is talking to the staff, the directors, the principals, the APs who are in the building, and having those conversations about what they value the most. And frankly, there's quite a few things up on the board that were not on my list of things to look at because they live that world. They're in that community. So today's been pretty productive. It'll take several days for Katie Grant to take all of those things and put it into groups and categories of comments, thoughts, and ideas. But I think it was important to involve principals this early because they're going to help us with the solutions, and they're going to help us plan the implementation. And frankly, without their support, you can't implement good ideas from the Ed Center, right? They're the leaders in our schools. And I think you'll find if you talk to the principals that I haven't gotten any negative feedback today. They appreciate being brought in early. They appreciate us listening and the dialogue from today. And you'll see there's thousands of sticky notes on the 8 different categories. And, it's easy to use words like transparent, but we really are. When we said in July, we were going to make this the most transparent budget bill ever. We knew that transparent doesn't mean easy. In fact, transparent sometimes means more complicated and more emotional. But the community has a right and a need to know that, when I look at programs, and we won't name any specific program, we know that 88% of all our money goes towards people. So when you talk about a program, it's not lost on Dr. Bryant or the staff that program is people with lives, houses and mortgages and families. So we understand what it really means when we're talking about programs and efficacy and outcomes and what works. But at the end of the day, it isn't the district that failed to change the BSA in fiscal year 18. It was the legislators' priorities for the past 6 years. And so we will have a balanced budget in February. And the board will vote on whatever that balanced budget is with maybe a few amendments thrown in.
Full space.
But we also at this table, because we're bringing in principals this early, we know that the second the board votes on the budget, we're also now refining what is that list and what is that prioritized groups and chunks of things that if the state comes back in May, June with additional funding, whether it's one time or a permanent fix to the BSA, that we've got to have a prioritized list ready to actually move on and not start discussing. So we can limit any disruption as much as possible. So you will, as you walk around to the schools, please ask the principals what they thought of this and get their feedback, because we want to do what's right by them and their kids and their staff. So that's my update on what we've done this week.
I think that's a wonderful update. Member Holloman.
I was going to say, I really appreciated the format at the work session where the program is listed and the marginal cost of that program, allowing for the fact that if we don't have students in that program, we still have them in a classroom, still have a teacher. I think at times in the past, we've been presented like the program costs this much, and it's all the salaries and it's all the resources. I'll even go so far as to say because that program had been picked for elimination. So it wasn't a true cost necessarily, but I feel like we're getting an accurate picture. It's still going to be terrible choices when it comes down to it, but I think the information is being very fairly presented.
Well, and there are some things when we put a dollar amount that there's always, it depends, right? Because if you say sixth grade band and orchestra, if sixth grade moves to middle school, they're going to need some music teachers because now they have more sixth graders in middle school. We haven't done that analysis yet, so we don't know the number.
Actually, you can just keep putting kids into music class. There's no way.
So, and honestly, bringing principals in and starting those discussions early, help us have the initial analysis and then refine that to what does this number actually mean? And it all depends on all those other questions. Does the middle school model remain? Because if the middle school model goes away, which has been done a couple times in the past and then brought back, there's cost savings for that. And all of those things compound on each other where the one number as a standalone really isn't accurate unless all these other things happen as well. So hopefully to our finance meetings, as we really talk about some of these things over the next few months and at work sessions, at least you understand what the numbers actually mean.
I had a comment. I appreciate your foreshadowing that we're going to receive student outcome data linked to the costs in our future meetings, because I think that there's an opportunity to show how funding directly impacts student learning. And I was just reading about how Tennessee has really leveraged their ESSER funds to make some transformative gains. And I feel like there is an opportunity for ASD to lead the way in the state of Alaska. And so, okay, if you want transformative student outcomes, this is the funding that's required to do just that.
Well, the other beauty is when we're talking to the legislature, there's always going to be a lot of priorities for the state, from permanent fund dividend to retirement homes to ferries to everything, to include education. There are a lot of legislators who've been very vocal in the past many years that they don't want to increase until they see things happening. But as we worked behind the scenes on the Alaska REITs Act to get the ADM funding for pre-K, spent a lot of time talking to legislators about how it ended up saving money by having pre-K, because now they may not need an IEP when they come into kindergarten. And all of those discussions behind the scenes helped build consensus that pre-K was important. So as we can tie assessment outcome data to the cost of programs, there's always very likely potentials to work with legislators about specific funding for specific things. And sometimes it's easier to get that than it is broad across the board funding increases, although frankly, we want both. We are still being funded at a level of 2017 by membership, right? That's the reality, although we had one-time funding to include federal and state. But so I think tying this assessment data to the cost is going to help us give the legislature other options besides one-time funding or BSA, but look at it programmatically for things that work. So it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort for us, and it's worth it to help the legislature help us.
Member Jacobs and then Member Higgins.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Wanted to express appreciation for Superintendent Bryant, Mr. Anderson, your team, the intentional and thoughtful and information-based conversations we're starting earlier than ever, I think are taking hold in the community, and having this most transparent budget process ever is doing a lot to inform the public. I've seen it in council meetings. It's going to be a conversation that should be happening now before legislators arrive to Juneau, and I think we're seeing the fruits starting to spread. So thank you, I appreciate it. Looking forward to next steps.
I tell you, it does help that we have a brand new superintendent that was in a very large district with $160 million deficit. So this is not his first rodeo at a large deficit, and understanding the public messaging, the public involvement. If anything he picked up quickly, he did understand having gone through it, large deficits and what it takes to build consensus as you come up with a plan. So that, I mean, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but but
Back and
it's
just
been
welcome
very
here.
helpful for the staff because it's not his first time going through this.
Member Higgins?
And I appreciate the discussion and I like the discussion with staff and particularly, principals as well in formulating this. I think the way I want to make sure is on the table is what's not just discussion the value of the program we got right now, but what's missing. I mean, we've got the curriculum issues, we've got other issues. What are we going to do in order to improve academic outcomes? And that may mean putting programs that aren't out there right now, priorities higher than what we've got existing. And I want to make sure that focus on improving academic outcomes is top on the list. And that means what else are we missing within the, even if we've got a big drop in funding and we're looking at trying to maintain what we've got, there are other options there to try to improve outcomes. Because our academic scores are not there. They're principal to say we've got a lot of improvement. Curriculum is one area where, to me, an audit is probably required, a review and changes, but we've got to look at doing things differently, not just what we're doing right now, how good it's doing, but what are we not doing that we need to do to change this? Because I really think that's a big nightmare we got right now, where we've got a cliff coming down, but we still got to look at changes, not just status quo.
I'm glad you brought that up. If you look at those poster boards, we specifically ask principals to tell us what we don't currently even have. That is absolutely something we need to look at adding in order to get to the direction and try to steer our discussion away from everything costs this much to, I mean, it all starts because of the deficit, but the decisions aren't just because of the deficit. They are students. That's our mission. And we did ask them to add new things that they think, and you'll see the categories, whether it was at, district supports and all the way down to within the school. So, and as I walked around, I saw things that people feel very personal about adding to their school. We've got months of conversations with principals as we try to figure out, some of them are conceptual in nature. So, we have many discussions to go, but we did make it clear that it's not all about everything has to be cut or reduced, that some things will have more money associated with them.
We tried to get into a discussion 12 years ago and said, okay, bad earthquake hits, we're starting from scratch, all the schools go, what would we do different to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve? And I guess that's what I'm focused on, saying, assume that whatever's out there isn't out there. We need to go from scratch. What do we need to do within ASD to get to be a high-performing school? And whatever that takes, then we need to have that on the table. That's what I would like to see.
I agree. I think where you're going to see the list of new ideas more prominently is potentially on the, if we get state funding, additional state funding later in the legislative session, do you really just rehire a program you reimagined, transformed, reduced, or eliminated? Do you just do that like we've done with health teachers? Or these other higher priority things that the schools have helped us develop, are those really the priority? And that reduction, elimination, transformation, that doesn't change? Because I know, unless barring a BSA, significant BSA increase, if they give us one-time funding and that's what we get, we're in the same boat 12 months from now, having the same discussions. So some of the things that we do to get efficiencies or increase capacity, some of them we don't want to relook again if there's something that's more important. And we do get the one-time money or a BSA increase. But it's going to have to be large. I mean, $30 is 0.5% over 8 years. That didn't even, the bucket's still dry on the bottom. So, but I agree with you completely.
Any other comments on our FY24
Just
budget? Yeah, President Bell.
yes, thank you. I do think, I agree with Member Jacobs that the community is really, they're paying attention. We've given them the survey. And they want to know what else they can do. And so while the legislation, and we are working on our legislative priorities, but in the interim, other than provide comment and give input, did we talk at some point about doing something so that we can, so the public could do something, like talk to a legislator, even though they're not in session, or do we just want to wait until we do our legislative priorities and give them that?
I think it never hurts as we go to town halls and talk to family members. I mean, the district administration is a apolitical organization.
Mhm.
We are apolitical by definition. I have no signs in my yard, despite the number of people in Eagle River who want to plant them there and see if they grow. But November 8th is the election. People are going to town halls and talking about their priorities, and they're receiving input and feedback from community members several days a week. Our cell phones are blowing up with texts to go to the next fundraising thing. If people want legislators to know what their priorities are, then they have to talk to those people running for office and when they make decisions. You look on Muldoon Avenue coming off the Glen Highway, I
Yeah.
see it every single morning. And one of the signs, the only word other than the individual's name is PFD.
Mhm.
So when legislators believe that's the community's priority, then they go into session just like they have the last 6 years. And the PFD is the community's priority. So that's the way they're gonna prioritize. If the community talks to them about the importance of education funding, then they'll be able to help prioritize in their own mind what the community feels is important. And I think the district administration, the school board, a lot of organizations have lobbied without end at the legislature for several years. But frankly, we have used fund balance, state one-time funding, federal relief dollars. The community did not, probably feel required to engage on is education funding a priority. But, this year, the biggest thing on the front page was the largest PFD ever.
Yeah.
And yet we're in a $68 million deficit for next year. So I don't think anybody's at fault on the legislature. I think they believe they're voting in accordance with the priorities of their communities. And if people talk, that's how legislators find out. But from a district administration, that's something school boards can do. It's not something I should be doing.
Is there any way that we can speak to our allies at the Alaska Association of School Boards? Because I imagine the other districts statewide are in a similar pickle.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So we can pursue that as well.
Member Jacobs?
Yeah, to Madam President's point, I had the privilege of speaking to a group of protected educators this past weekend, actually. I think the eyes widened when they heard that all legislative seats in Alaska but one were going to be on the ballot, including the entire Anchorage delegation. Being nonpartisan in our roles, I kept to saying that ask the candidates who knock on your door and ask them to throw a sign in your yard how they feel about the base student allocation, and ask those questions and utilize that when you enter the voting booth. And that got a lot of energy. I saw folks looking, pointed out that the website, which is online through the AK Ledge page, that folks can find out what district they're in. Folks are going to candidates' websites. And so providing context to the unique opportunity Anchorage residents have and Alaskans have right now, I think is a really quick way that we can engage them.
Yeah. And I do send them to our legislative priorities page, because it's got a lot of links on there too. Like, but it's just an odd time with people, not being in session. But I think the more we get into it, I think people are going to find that they will need information, but they'll find it throughout discussions and hearing from us. And so, because I don't want to, it's just when I've gotten a couple of emails where people say, so what is this BSA and who do I talk to about that? You know, and so I send them some information. So I'm just thinking, and I don't necessarily mean for the staff to do this, but maybe the board needs to have some kind of campaign. And I don't know what that looks like, but maybe we can talk about that.
Since I haven't been in the district for more than 7 years, I can understand the confusion in the public. When I would hear the governor pick a year for the last 15 years, we fully funded education, it never dawned on me, nor did I ever understand that they fully funded me at a rate from 6 years prior, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
technically, because that's the statute, it's an honest statement to say I fully funded education. They
Yeah.
just left out at the 2017 level.
Yeah, right.
Um,
And that's
And
a
that's, I didn't
whole different
understand.
awareness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So perhaps we can work with communications. I'm seeing a head nod over there about a way that we can help educate the public about what
And
is
not
the
be
BSA.
political.
So
How do they find their legislators or the candidates for their legislative office?
So I'll plan to see, we have our communications committee next
Next
Thursday,
Thursday,
so
okay.
this would be good to add to the agenda since Heather is gonna be on the agenda, so it's a natural.
Oh,
it's a
cool
great
segue.
topic
Okay,
that
yeah.
We're already gonna talk, so let's add it to the agenda.
Okay.
So
Terrific.
MJ and I had
Madam
worked
Chair.
out just by
Yeah,
You.
we just start mentioning it.
Excellent. I know that.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, any other member
I
Higgins?
just want to comment, we talk about more funding, we need more, but one of the legislatures will tell you is that what's adequate. And we did a study back 12 years ago on what's adequate, 10 years ago, and looked at it from the standpoint that's objective. It was used in the lower 48, FICA Solon study, and it looked at the classroom sizes, it looked at the administrators, and it looked at all the other costs associated based upon what's considered adequate funding in court decisions in the lower 48. And that's the one at that time showed us over $100 million underfunded and number the classroom sizes so that we can get the results that we wanted. That's what they linked it together with. So I think when we talk to the legislators will tell us what's adequate. If I double it, would that be adequate? And they asked a small school district and said, well, I don't know. They said, well, then I don't know either. But we do have information out there that shows that our classroom sizes are larger than the lower 48, which you got 30-something states with maximum effective classroom sizes. We're larger than that substantially. They start 15, 1 K through 3 is the largest, and we're not in that category. So I just, all the options that are out there, defining, giving more information out there in regards to why we think we're underfunded, other than just that we got the same funding as 2017. It's more than that. I think we need to get that out.
And I will just say, I appreciate that definition of what is adequate.
Yeah.
We did receive information in Board Connect about the state of more than 700 K through 3 classes. And we have class sizes that, if we use that FICA Audit definition, are significantly higher than adequate. But it's how we've pieced it together. And we know that the costs of that are above $115 million.
Also, if you read the study, it did say that that's not the most important thing.
Mhm.
It was still teacher expertise and competency, building leadership. I mean, there were other things and you can get stuck on class size, but we have teachers with much larger class sizes where the classes are doing really well because they're that amazing. We have an AP teacher at Eagle River that keeps taking more kids, and it's AP math, and he's got over 40 kids in the class because that's what he does. He's a student whisperer with math. So
It's not the end all.
so it's not there's other stuff, and we're working on helping teachers be the best that they can possibly be. And sometimes when you look at studies, you get caught on the one thing that sticks out that costs the very most, and it might not be the most important thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it might not be where you put the first available money you have toward. And it's teachers and principals.
Well,
Although we need teachers.
especially if they're student whisperers.
We need more of that.
Okay, well, I'd like to move to item 3 in today's agenda, which is a review of memorandum 024. And just to recap, the administration presented the original memo at the September 6th meeting, and it detailed incoming funds courtesy of the legislature for one-time operational funding, school bond debt reimbursement, and it also opened up a few options for how we might allocate those funds. And there were a couple of cost neutral items as well that were a part of the original memo. And then the administration really did a wonderful job of breaking down proposed projects, capital priorities potentially for 2023, as well as 2024. I think that was a response to board interest in understanding the district's needs at this point in time. My intent today is to have a robust conversation in this committee among the board members that we have gathered here and administrators, and ask the finance committee to ultimately recommend passage of a substitute memo. Member Jacobs and I spent a good deal of time drafting a substitute. So to recommend passage of that substitute memo as drafted or as amended here today. And I did want to clarify that this will be amended to clarify the SR 123 sort of official names within the memo to make sure we are noting things correctly. I wanted to begin by bringing up the sort of the pertinent facts that Member Jacobs and I spelled out in the substitute, that these funds from the legislature are coming as we confront a historic fiscal cliff. The district's purchasing power is approximately $80 million less than what we could afford in 2017 in real dollars. We are dealing with an unchanged district cost factor. That's a part of the foundation formula. It's nearly 2 decades old. We've had flat funding for the BSA and for transportation for a number of years. We've had nearly a decade of enrollment declines. We have received doses of federal funds, which we are leaning on heavily this year to manage our operations. We have a significant amount of deferred maintenance, both major and minor. I think that the board and the community are really focused and paying attention to the question of student safety. We're grappling with gubernatorial vetoes of school bond debt reimbursement over a number of years. And we have an opportunity to try to accelerate student learning and make safe, secure, reliable, healthy spaces for our students to learn, for our staff to work in, for our community to invest in. So what I'd like to do for a process is begin with the recommendations, starting with the cost neutral transfers that the administration originally recommended, and have board consensus or board discussion about each of those points. And we'll see what needs amending and what the finance committee will ultimately recommend. Any comments, questions at this point? Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to preface before we start off by saying I appreciate having the opportunity to work with Kelly on drafting this substitute. We have tried tirelessly to engage administration and appreciate all their time and energy and working with us and communicating as I think our latest revision was number 6 or 7 as we continue to gather information and facts. What I would ask the committee as it considers today is this board has been very intentional. Given the increased turnout, we often see full boards at these committee meetings, which hasn't historically always been the case. And so utilizing input from the full board, although the committee has the right to modify as it sees fit, is in line with what we've seen in governance and communications, and what keeps us functioning as the well-oiled machine that we are. In my humble opinion. So thank you for your time and consideration.
And for the record, I wanted to know that member Donnelly is online on the phone, so we will be paying attention to anything that he might ask or say. And also that members Bellamy and Wilson joined us moments after we began our meeting, for the record. Okay, so I'd like to begin with the recommendation that the board would approve the cost neutral items for need of education budget and special education budget revisions. Is there any dissent on those items?
Those were recommended.
Those
by
were
the
recommended by the administration, and I wanted to make sure, we wanted to make sure they were incorporated into this draft substitute. Okay, seeing.
My only question would be, are the amounts,
Believe that they are identical.
they are,
They're accurate. We do this every fall where we budget for positions that we end up having to contract out or modify because we can't find those people. And that's why we try to make them cost neutral because it's already been budgeted for.
okay,
So it's really not looking for new money. It's, we can't find this. So let's take that budgeted authority and do this.
Great. Okay, and the second, or I guess now this is the third bullet point. So this is really now speaking to option 3 in the administration's original memo, which sort of said, well, what does the board want to do? I'm paraphrasing here. We've spoken about how the district's fiscal cliff will be about $68 million if we save $16 million in one-time funding. So I'd like to get any board discussion about saving $16 million in one-time operational funding. Is there any disagreement to that proposal? No, great. Moving right along.
Can you see member down?
Yes.
He actually left the meeting.
Oh, he did leave the
okay.
meeting. Okay.
I do not.
Now there was the one item that we added to the substitute memo that was not a part of the original memo was the information about $9.5 million in major maintenance. And here we suggested $9.5 million in major maintenance to capital projects needing immediate mitigation. This may be starting this fall, including but not limited to Diamond High School, Bartlett High School, Ursa Major Elementary School. And I wonder if the administration could speak to any of those priorities and its stance on including this $9.5 million in this memo.
I kind of think first, the 9.5, just like the bond debt reimbursement, doesn't need to be all decided and solution for every dollar now. We do, when we get to bond debt reimbursement, we are aware that just the timing of being able to get next summer's projects in, those are things that we would certainly encourage a quick decision on. But on the 9.5, you can do it like this, or we can still hold off, just like we could on some of the bond debt reimbursement money, and wait until Rob and his team have had a chance to come back. We've got multiple roofs out there leaking that either way, we have to come back to the board. So even if you put this in, like we think the design for Ursa Major, we're going to get a 15% sometime in October. We need 65% to be able to get cost analysis for repair versus rebuild. We're pretty sure that this would be a great choice for being able to get the design money to get the 65% design, so the board can make a long-term decision. But even if you put it in here, the way it's written, we still have to come back to you and ask for approval. So I guess my only comment would be, we don't have to make all decisions now, and some can wait. And on the major maintenance, I would put it like part of the bond debt reimbursement, that those decisions don't necessarily, I mean, frankly, it's not even a decision. We still have to come back either way.
we have no idea what the cost is gonna be for Ursa Major yet, right?
No, we don't. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, yours.
Well, correct. What we need to do, though, much like we did for Inlet View, we need to spend some money to get it
Get it
designed.
designed.
We're gonna have an overview of the direction in October. This is called a 15%.
Okay.
We're gonna need to spend some money to create a design. And that money will be somewhere between, I would say roughly $1.5 to $3 million to spend with. a
So it
plan
seems to
to-
me that that's just not a lot of money. I don't know that 0.5 million, it's going to, I mean, I think for, in the view alone will eat up all that money. But we can always come back to it. I think that's it. That's what you're saying, is to not,
I don't think we really have to make we know that we have 4 or 5 roofs that are leaking really bad, but we also have record rainfall. And anytime you have 2 straight months of rain, you have more leaks than you normally would. Until we get an analysis on those
Okay.
as to whether they're damaging internal structures and now make it a priority because of that, I think within a month or so, we're gonna have a better list for the board on what we think we should use that, what we would recommend that 9.5 be used for. And frankly, even then, we may only have a recommendation for half of it. And knowing that bad things happen sometimes, that the other half would be at a later point when we had fully fleshed out staffed recommendations. I think sometimes in the past, the administration did try to come up with the complete solution, and some of it maybe was premature and didn't have to be decided yet. And so I'm, because of everything else this year, I'm certainly cautious of not over deciding too early, only to find out that the real priority we'll know about next month.
If I may speak, I think part of the intent that Member Jacobs and I had in noting this was to acknowledge that those funds existed. And perhaps the Finance Committee would be interested in supporting an acknowledgement of those funds, but editing this in a way that would allow us to make decisions on an as-needed basis in support of future capital projects.
If I might, Member Wilson.
Yep.
So yeah, I think our intention collectively, when we were discussing these funds originally in the administration's proposal, and we listed it all, it was to find middle ground that acknowledged the receipt as well as the general plan, while giving the administration's preached flexibility. Just about everyone I've talked to, we recognize more than ever, for whether it be budget issues or 2 months of rain, that flexibility is important. And so I think that was the thought behind it, knowing that we'll still follow the process, but we are acknowledging here, right? And so that's the intent.
And I appreciate you put in that either way, we have to come back to the board with a complete list. So I'm not violently opposed. It's a decision for us to come back and talk to you.
Sure. Member Higgins?
Yes, and we realize we have limited
Yep.
time here at this particular point, but this is all part of one bigger discussion. We've got, what are we gonna do for, I mean, our deferred maintenance is to the ceiling compared to what it was. We've come down some with my debt, but our deferred maintenance is massive at this point. We've got what, $2 billion of property, and we can expect somewhere around 50 million plus to maintain things if we were running like a regular business. We're not trying to be special along with it. And we've got what
800 and something.
$800 and something million in deferred, and not addressing that ends up expecting the life expectancy of the buildings as well. So I somehow think this is some big picture issue that we have to deal with, not just what we're gonna do with this money, but how we're gonna, if we give money back now, but we go with a bond in April, what kind of message is that? We need to have an honest discussion about how serious the deferred maintenance is. And to me, no more one big bond. I think we need to look at the separate bonds so that we can say, look, we got $100 million out here on roofs. We just have to fix them, because otherwise we always got more internal damages, and that doesn't make good business sense. And I'm from a practical standpoint. So I just think within the limited time, I appreciate the fact that we're looking global, but I think the crisis is what we need to know. We've got to put money into some schools because of roofs, because of this. Let's dedicate that portion right away. Let's go ahead and do that, because it's stupid to delay that and then have mildew and further carpets and everything else damage and safety for kids. So give us the crisis that need to be addressed, and then we'll see what we got.
Remember, that's what, we haven't gotten to it yet, but that's.
Yeah,
what it's done
yeah.
as well.
So for the sake of time, what I'd like to ask Finance Committee support is to amend this particular item to say 9.5 million in major maintenance to capital projects, which shall be presented to the full board for prior approval. And I think that gets to the intent of both acknowledging and directing these funds towards projects on an as-needed basis
With that flexibility.
with that flexibility, but knowing that we will direct those funds in that manner. The next two items, the $7.3 million in secure vestibules and security improvements and $38.4 million in urgent capital improvements, both reflect the priorities the administration laid out in attachment A. So Member Jacobs and I didn't have any changes to that. These are both, I think, what we would call shovel ready. You have, and they are doable within the 2023 season. Is that correct?
They would be
Start.
ready to start this summer.
Okay, they're ready to go because the design specifications are already there.
We're already there.
Okay, is there any discussion? Yeah, please.
One point I didn't think I heard, but I want to make sure, and I believe administration will verify, these are all also on our CIP.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
The one clarification.
Our capital improvement plan.
Yeah,
So we're pulling from a document the board's already seen and approved.
and small clarification, the only item not on current CIP is the security cameras
So
in the schools that need to come up. That's been discussed.
right.
Oh,
And so there are more details available in attachment A about each of these projects. This is just a condensed version
Got
of those. Okay, so I guess I would like to
so
say,
can I
yes,
just ask
please.
the administration a question? So are these the projects, Jim, that you wanted to get like approved or at least
Yes,
out
ma'am.
there like right away?
If we can get this approved at
Should we-
the first board meeting in October, we have time to get the
Okay.
RFPs on the street in the month of October and get ahead of the competitive cycle for available construction this summer.
Okay,
If it delays past October, then it's like how we saw ourselves with Aquarian and there's less people bidding because they've already got their projects for this summer.
but October 4th would be,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if members of the Finance Committee would consider recommending those items, that would be, I see heads nodding, I'll take that as a yes. We will move down to the $11.8 million to repay ASD's debt service fund balance, which was used to make payments in each of the years that school bond debt reimbursements were reduced. These funds shall be used to lower ASD's overall tax burden in 2023 and or 2024 and or 2025. And maybe at this point, I will pause to ask Jim to speak to what exactly the debt service fund balance is and if the administration has a stance on this item.
One, we've had the conversation one-on-one. I don't think it's been talked about in public that we have talked in public about how flexible the state bond debt reimbursement money was. Kelly and I have not talked in depth, but just a little bit about the reality that state bond debt reimbursement money could also be used if it wasn't committed early. There could be other options as we look at finally closing our budget out because it's so flexible. So when you're looking at a $68 million deficit, if you make decisions on all of this very early on, then you have no flexibility when it comes to January and February. So if some decisions don't have to be made right now, there is some logic in holding on those decisions in case what ends up really being a priority to the board in December through February really is some of the incredibly difficult choices the board has to make that they would prefer to use these kind of funds for. So I don't know how
Okay,
better to say
so-
that.
Right, so you are saying that there are, if we don't dedicate this specifically at this moment to that purpose,
It just
there's
sits
more
until you do.
flexibility a little bit later.
Mhm.
So I'd like to open this up for board discussion about this particular, I guess we're on this bullet point. What is your interest in even the concept of reducing tax burden in any amount, whether it's the entirety of the school bond debt reimbursement or $1 million of the school bond debt reimbursement? Is there board interest in reducing taxpayer burdens, or is there more interest in being nimble and addressing ASD's needs?
I support reducing taxpayer burden.
Okay, thank you. Member Donnelly?
What did
He
you
said,
say?
I support reducing taxpayer burdens.
Well, I think we all support it.
Mhm,
I'm just trying to figure out, it just depends on what it looks like.
mhm. Member Higgins?
Well, we're gonna be looking at going out with a bond because we've got $800 million plus in deferred maintenance. We've got funding since 2017, and we're paying for maintenance on a regular basis out of our budget anyway, which we don't have the funds, but we're spending a whole lot of money for maintenance. That's not capital investments in maintaining what we've got, and we're not maintaining everything the way we need to maintain it. It's such a missed message to say we're going to return some of this, but then in April we're going to ask for more money, and we're telling everybody we don't have enough money to better maintain things, but we've got $800 million in deferred maintenance. I'm not worried about I'm not worried about or focused on trying to look good. I'm looking at trying to run the place good. I guess that's the issue. And giving some money back looks good. Okay, it really does. We'll go ahead and cut some back, but then we're going to be asking for April for you to give us even more. There were so many needs here in the district, from the roofs to you name it, for safety reasons, for security reasons, for all kind of factors, that we're getting messages to say, we'll give you this back, but you have to give us more in April. What if we don't get it in April? I don't want to put the safety of the kids, I don't want to put the structure of the buildings at risk. And I don't want to send a message to say, we're managing better because we're giving you some money back at this point. We're not in that category. We're just the opposite direction. We've taken down the bonds, the amount of bonds, but we've driven up how much we need money to come in for big projects and to correct it. So I'm not supportive. I'm supportive of always cutting back what public pays if we can. But in this particular case, we've been doing that because we get less from the state. The inflation is not adjusted. And we're looking even more later when we've got a reduction in students, but we don't get any support from the state because that's going to go down to zero. We're doing that already, but we're doing it on an involuntary basis. That's how we put it. I think the needs of this district are too great to send a message out that we have funds that we can give back when we're telling them we don't have the funds for all the roofs and for everything else we need to do. I just have concerns that that's a mixed message, and it's also, from a management perspective, to me, not achieving what we need to do. We have to put safety in the operations of the district to be well managed as much as we can, and we've got serious needs out there, and I don't want to see those needs not met. We are symbolic, and I think it is symbolic, 11 million to go back to the taxpayers implies that this is how much we need, but this is how much we don't need. It's not valid. We do have a need, and that need is greater than what we're getting back from the state right now. We need more than that. So the $800 million is real in deferred maintenance. I believe that. I've been there, I've gone through it, looked at some of the projects. It's significant, and if we're going to maintain schools the way they are, we need more, not less. And I just don't want to send that message out.
Member
Chair
Jacobs?
Lessen, this is
Yes,
Dave Donnelly. Hi.
go ahead, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'd really like to hold some funding back as a possible emergency fund if we're unable to reach agreements on the 68 million in operating budget reductions we're going to be trying to achieve. And also, I would support using some of it for taxpayer burden reduction.
Okay, so you're speaking more broadly about the remaining funds after the 16 million, the 9.5 in major maintenance, the 7 million in secure vestibules, and the 38 in capital improvements. Of those remaining funds, you would suggest holding some funds back as a possible emergency fund and allocating some portion of the remainder towards taxpayer relief.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had your statement for the record. Member Jacobs?
Yeah. Thank you. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things and make sure that they didn't get lost in the shuffle. The 11.8 million, I don't see it as a recognition that the district has extra money to allocate. This is intended to repay money that was previously borrowed for other purposes. I think that we're going to need a few things going forward to solve the ongoing fiscal challenges our district faces. Number one is cooperation from Juneau. Another thing is cooperation from taxpayers here locally. This transfer would be fiscally responsible. It would be in line with the 3 million that we used to repay the general fund when those funds were repurposed for another capital improvement challenge. And would also be transparent and accountable. I think we all agree, and it will focus on student safety and ensuring our facilities are up to date. You mentioned the $800 million backlog. The minimum references is fine even higher than that number. And so we cannot solve this challenge with just the folks here at the table. And to me, not acknowledging that these funds, we seriously consider refunding our debt service to lose out one of the stakeholders from the conversation we need to have. And so that's the intent there. With that said, Mr. Anderson's point and Member Higgins' point towards flexibility, Member Donnelly's point towards flexibility is absolutely valid. I think there's opportunities in the memorandum here to do that. I just don't think that leaving this allocation out at this point is my recommendation.
I want to acknowledge that it's going to be difficult to say yes or no on any of these in and of themselves. So maybe we can circle. Oh, Member Holloman, is that your hand?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was going
I thought
to
you were
suggest,
early.
I was going to suggest that we also discuss the two other bullet points here. 3 million towards towards the major maintenance item to address minor maintenance needs, and 25.8 million to fund one of two options. So I think that all of these discussion points maybe need to happen simultaneously, but Member Holloman,
Yeah,
raise your hand.
and just speaking broadly, if there was a way to actually return the money to the people that paid it, I'd think about that. But of course, it doesn't go back exactly to the people that paid it. There's some overlap, but it varies. And if we start doing the right thing, we run out of money before we finish doing the right things. I would see an opportunity for the board to go ahead and direct this money, not right away, but earlier than waiting for a bond, an uncertain bond, and proceed through the year without some of the chaos that comes from not knowing if the bond's going to pass. But continue our original plan of not having a 2023 bond package on the ballot. And I know it's a tough thing. If you go to the public with a bond package, they're not really voting on whether or not those are good ideas or not. They're just voting on whether you can borrow money to do them. And the easiest way is, bond package with boilers on it gets voted down. It doesn't mean that the boilers are going to be okay. It just means you have to find a different way to do the things you're going to do. This is an unusual situation. I do think not having a bond package in April is a legitimate savings to the public, not asking them to reach into their pockets for more. But we also have the opportunity to manage the money that's come to us in a much more reasonable way that I think lets projects do their job in a better way, and take some of the guesswork from the CFO about what the future is going to be. And that's the most logical way to proceed with this. And I'd love to give money back to the taxpayers. I'd get a little bit of it myself, but I don't think it's going to be enough that really matters to people. I think it'd be symbolic. And then really, as Member Higgins pointed out, we turn around in April and say, okay, we need 100 million.
We gave you 10, now we need 100.
Yeah. So I think we should proceed with that in mind of the best and wisest use of the resources we've got over the reasonable period of time for allocating them.
See, what's it? I saw Member Higgins and then-
One second, I apologize, but I have got an urgent medical appointment I have to go to, so I'm gonna have to leave.
Okay.
I don't want to leave this discussion, but I don't have an option, so,
Can I ask then, before you leave, I'd like to have a sense of your support for one of the two options for the $25.8 million that Member Jacobs and I have outlined. Option one is allocation towards the demolition and reconstruction of Inlet View Elementary School pending approval of the design by the Urban Design Commission. And option two is allocation to the ASD Capital Projects Fund to be further allocated following passage of the FY24 budget.
let me briefly just say, I am supportive of them for a number of reasons. It is, we have some decline in students, but we don't have enough schools that are built safely. We've got a lot of kids in charter schools that are unsafe. There was a lot of reasons to, in my opinion, for educational purposes, that something has to be done within the view positively. That school, from a construction standpoint, to try to maintain it and the cost associated with long term, it doesn't pencil out. From my standpoint, doing something with that school and going forward with the plan, doing it as cost effectively as we can, absolutely. But doing it, but going forward, it makes sense in my opinion, that the justification's been there. And it's just a matter of how much can we fund. I don't want to make sure we fund it enough so that we go forward, we don't have to leave out the windows and the doors. But I would like to make sure that we get it as cost effectively as we can go forward, but I am supportive of that.
Okay, so as a member of the Finance Committee, it would be your recommendation as one of those three members that we bring that forward to the full board for discussion.
And then
Okay, we'll go back to
15
member
minutes, I'll be giving.
Bellamy.
I forgot what I was gonna say. Well, no, I just wanted to just make a comment that however, spending this money in the long range, in the long term, if we are wise and if we are purposeful, we will give the taxpayers relief because we won't have to ask for as much money in the future. So that's how I look at this. I don't look at it as sending taxpayers a check, but making sure that we use these one-time funds wisely so that we don't have to come back to them for some things in the future. That would, to me, that's how I look at this
And
whole
thinking
process.
about these funds broadly,
At broadly,
that the
yes,
wise stewardship is a
exactly,
form of serving our taxpayer needs.
exactly.
Member Wilson, you didn't raise your hands, but I'm going to call on you as a
Yeah,
member
you
of the
bet.
Finance Committee to speak your piece.
In regarding the 25 million.
Well,
correct?
sure, we can begin.
that
Let's
what
be,
we're-
yes,
or-
could you speak to your thoughts on the 25 million for
So
one of those two options?
I am obviously, I have been an advocate for Inlet View as well. My dilemma comes in, as far as language
Mhm.
is by the allocation of ASD Capital Projects Fund, that language has more flexibility. And I've learned this because I was at Eagle River Elementary the day before the earthquake, in which they said, we're not on the bond. We were not deemed to be needing to be rebuilt at this point, or at this point repaired, or whatever their language was at the time. And then the next day the earthquake happened and Eagle River needed direct attention. Right. I mean, it was, so I've learned firsthand that pigeonholing money for one project when we don't know what's going to happen in a week or a month, and may absolutely need to access those funds for a more emergent purpose, language wise, is why I would recommend the second bullet point. Again, I'm fully supportive of Inlet View, and my hope and intention is for that to be allocated towards Inlet View, but to keep in mind that it's Alaska and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
How much does the cost on a new Inlet View increase? I mean, it was 32 million.
Right, if we begin, if we begin in 2023 versus if we begin in 2024,
Mhm.
could you outline
Do we have a cost?
the cost
Because this is
projection?
not enough to build a
Just
school.
north of 36 million.
36.
Yes.
And that's for
The- the
beginning
cons-
construction
The
when?
construction of the plant as it exists currently.
And that's if we begin next, in 2023 or in 2024?
There isn't a differentiator
But there's not?
Oh, okay.
for that yet. That number assumes starting next summer, but I don't have any number to tell you how that might look another year after that. It's too fluid of an economy and a market condition. It really just is.
Okay. All right, so, but the ballpark is $36 million if we start next summer. If we, this is a question for the administration, knowing that you would like to send out RFPs in October for various projects. I assume that
next year.
you would, right, for next year. If the board allocated this $25 million or more to the capital projects fund to be reallocated to the budget following passage in February, does that give the administration time to begin to prepare for redesign, I mean, not for redesign, for demolition and rebuilding the school in the summer of 2023?
Two things. There's not enough money here to cover Inlet View anyway.
Mhm.
There's enough money to cover the demo for Inlet View, but not enough money to do the contract for the rebuild. So it could be looked at in two different ways. But if you demo it and we do that contract, not knowing if the bond's going to pass, then you've pretty much decided what's the first school you're going to vote on to close, right? I mean, it will certainly put you in an awkward position to approve the demo before you have the bond passed to actually rebuild. But I mean, you certainly can do that. Would be nothing stopping the board. That would be the first school that would close and maybe get rebuilt when the bond passed, but there's not enough flexibility to guarantee that, right?
Yeah, Member Holland?
Demolition wouldn't start until the school's built, correct?
That's true.
Well, that's true. There's not a lot of demo. That's true. But then you don't have enough to do a contract to start the build either.
So ASD needs all of the money on the
Yeah.
table in order to begin the project.
We couldn't contract, I mean, the lessons, we couldn't contract without the funding intact.
I don't think you could contract to get close to getting there. And then it's going to require the funding to do.
The full funding, the full 36 million.
So, but we could get there if we moved the 11.8 million to the 25.8 million. The money is available to us to allocate it as we desire to be stewards of the taxpayers' money. And I think that is like a core question here, right? Is Inlet View a school that we want to see available for Anchorage's long-term future? Or is Inlet View ultimately not a school, not a location that we see as a part of Anchorage's long-term future? Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you. Member Wilson. I think my perspective of my questions, the board's already asked, and it's been asked and answered, because we prioritized Inlet View for forward 2 years in the CIP, to including on this year's bond. I think it's a matter of how the board wants to pursue Inlet View as part of its larger budget conversation and capital improvement conversation. Right now, we're about to engage in significantly challenging conversations with families of particular schools here as early as next month. Talking about school closures, program redesigns, families. We're already seeing some emails, but it's just a drift compared to what we're about to receive. And speaking to Member Wilson's point about flexibility, do we want to have and Mr. Anderson's point too about flexibility and having part of this conversation later? Do we want to take care of the urgent things now and finish the conversation at a later point? I think is ultimately reasonable. To put a finer point, I guess, on some of the conversation that happened a few minutes ago, Mr. Anderson or Dr. Bryant and team, if the board allocated, supported in the view in this memorandum and added the remainder to a bond proposition for next spring, and that passed, what would the time frame look like? We had a similar time frame this past year when we didn't have that the measure on the bond for the full project. I believe the intent was to begin the project as early stages this summer. But can someone provide context as to what the timeline would look like if we go through with that timeline?
Yes, Member Jacobs, the timeline would look like construction beginning the summer of 24.
So
At
a
the
spring of
earliest.
2023 bond would enable construction to
Assuming
start in
the bond-
2024.
Assuming that bond passed and was combined with this approximate 25 million, and that was adequate to fund the school at its current design, then you would be looking at construction inception of 2024 summer.
Point of information, people online would like those farther away from the microphone, from the owl, to speak up. And just to restate what you just said, so a potential bond in the spring of 2023 would allow adequate funding to begin an Inlet View project in 2024.
Yeah, logistically. It would be too close to the summer. Those major contractors, to a point Mr. Anderson made earlier, they would have their build season already completely booked for
But-
summer 23.
Okay, by the same token, if we directed ballpark $37.6 million towards Inlet View and whatever else to be determined following passage of the FY24 budget, and with the intent that Inlet View took up the majority of those funds, is that too late to begin construction in 2023?
So we are, for the record, we're speaking for the month of February of 20.
Correct. I mean, following that.
Passage of the budget,
Mhm.
I would still say that would be too late
Mhm.
for the 23 season, that would not be a reasonable lead time.
However, if we allocated those funds now, this fall, by the first meeting in October, would those funds, if we fully funded the Inlet View, those funds would enable a 2023 build, start project?
That would be the most reasonable chance of funding a summer 23 start.
If it's been approved by the urban design
If,
by then, right?
gonna,
We don't know that it will be approved by then.
thank you. I was gonna add a footnote that UDC meeting is tonight at 6:30 p.m.
Okay, we are nearly at time.
Can I have one?
Oh, yes, sir.
Information, Tom? So the current workload for industry in our community, assuming we go forward with 38 million in capital improvements and the 7 million security vestibule and security improvements, can industry also handle the work of View in summer of 23?
They'll prioritize like everyone else on what they can make the most revenue on.
Well,
That's the answer. There's always risk that other stuff. What happens when competition's reduced is you end up with one bidder. So now all of our estimates for other stuff, or even Inlet View, it depends on which one's last. We'll have fewer bidders and that will cost more than what we estimated it to cost. When capital plans and Rob say, this is what we think the community can absorb in one summer, that's why we had attachment A and attachment B, not because we didn't think the other schools were important. It's we thought that collective group was about the maximum amount that realistically the community could build this summer. So when you add a really huge project on top of it, we don't know what's going to happen. And I mean, I remember Aquarium doubled in price, right? We don't know the impact.
Can I move to extend this meeting by 5 minutes? I know. Okay, I don't have to. Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to extend this meeting by
We
5
have to do it
minutes.
for the general meeting, but
Okay.
because of statute.
All right, thank you.
I was gonna say, do you see a severe impact from Build Back Better in terms of absorbing capacity in Anchorage to complete projects.
I don't know how much of that money is actually going to come to Alaska outside of the EV charging station at the Igloo, the small remote nuclear reactors that are part of, I don't know how much those communities down south that do have lots of money coming to them, they're going to be, the whole construction industry, like the tourist industry, is looking for workers. They're going to be offering people money to come where the jobs are. And so we will potentially be competing for those same people, right?
And I do have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I do think, first of all, if we're gonna fund them with you, we do need to fund the whole thing. I think it would be a PR disaster to fund 2/3 of it and then say, oh, we're gonna ask you for a bond for the rest. We need to either do it or not do it. And I do see advantages in doing it early. Also, just backing up and looking at it, we could go around for years before we got the bond passed. I believe Service High School upgrades got done piecemeal, and that turned into a morass. But they had the advantage of having a bunch of separate buildings, so construction could be kind of isolated. And I can't remember how long we spent getting Clark passed.
Well, Clark failed. They took a hiatus and didn't bring it up for a couple of years. And then when they bonded again, they had spent those 2 years not working just with the community around Clark, but Anchorage writ large.
Yeah.
So if you choose to focus on this one school, but didn't do the community engagement, there's certainly risk on future bonds for people who.
I do think we're at the point where we have the opportunity to make it happen. And there's value in doing that and going forward with a lot of certainty and getting back to the bond package that eventually comes, not having one huge item on it that may be just may be difficult to convince everybody across the municipality to vote for. So I think we need to configure our allocation so that we can start, and ideally start sooner rather than later. Hear the applause.
Regarding the Build Back Better, the little bit of information I have regarding that kind of money is a lot of it will go into telecommunications in Alaska. I mean, that's where the focus is going to be rather than other industries. So just, again, the little bit I know about that is telecommunications.
Yeah, it's just whether our construction workers leave Alaska for higher paying jobs. That's what we don't know.
Telephone in the building.
And it's, yeah, not necessarily.
Most of it's lower 48 as we would expect.
I do have one question, clarification, and I guess maybe for the record is, when do we anticipate having conversations, projection of when we anticipate having conversations about closing schools, merging schools, those kind of conversations?
On the 4th of October is the first board meeting. Shannon Bingham will be at the table with us. We've already started working with him, providing him information, and you should expect an initial analysis with maybe not recommended closures, but most likely candidates for closure or repurpose on the 18th of October. If we're just not there yet because we need principal input, we need some other stuff to make sure, then it would push it naturally to the following board meeting. But you'll meet Shannon for the first time on the 4th. And as quickly as we can pull together the products, if we can do it that quick, then you would expect to see names either at the second board meeting in October or hopefully no later than the 1st in November.
Okay, so that would help me with the capital project kind of conversations.
It'll be the same meeting that we pass this memo on our current timeline.
Right. Frankly, we don't think we're even going to know the number of schools on the 4th of October, not because we don't want to share, we don't think we're going to have it.
So it'll be an ongoing.
So we think in October will be a discussion of the metrics that we're using, the data that we're analyzing. All these different things from major maintenance recent that's been put into a building, major maintenance future for long-term costs, minor maintenance, utilities, and then the student demographics. There's plus the analysis on the gaining schools and what the impact. We're not going to have that by the 4th of October.
It seemed early. That's why. That seemed really quick, so thank you for the clarification.
It'll be a very poorly staffed list.
So for the sake of time, this is a finance committee meeting, not a full board meeting. We're not formally voting on anything here today. Unfortunately, we've just lost one of our finance committee members, but I would like the finance committee to feel comfortable bringing a recommendation to the board, and perhaps we'll rehash some of these discussions both as a non-action item and again as an action item. I'm going to propose that you guys have had many insightful comments, and I believe that everybody here wants to do best by our students and our community. I'm going to propose that we combine these two items and direct it in support, for the sake of conversation in our upcoming board meeting, towards the allocation and in support of an allocation towards the demolition and reconstruction of Inlet View, pending approval by the current design by the Urban Design Commission. And I will send a revised memo to the finance committee members to formally request their approval right after this meeting. I'll redraft something and we'll send it to Amanda to move it as a substitute memo for board discussion on the 20th.
So what is not, I hear what you're saying, but what is not getting done? Because we're getting
Well,
40, almost $40 million, you're putting it aside for one purpose.
So it would
That's
remove
almost half
for
of-
the,
that's half of, what is not going to get done in the district? I guess that's the question.
well,
No.
it would remove the debt service fund balance question.
What you're saying is you're gonna add that debt service balance to the 25
Mhm.
and allocate it only to Inlet View.
Well, there will be a remainder given Rob's estimate, and I guess I would ask for a,
Yeah, but it's
30.
not, it's not significant.
it's an,
For planning purposes, I wouldn't count on the remainder. Because please understand, as a reminder, that the invitation to bid process from start to finish is about a 5-month process.
Mm.
And to Jim's earlier point, it's very difficult to predict the responses we'll get back from the vendor.
Mhm.
So I think we're talking about basically rounding money we would categorize as rounding at this point.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't advise that we would count on any balance.
So my question is, what, if we do it that way, then what in our district is not going to get done? If we're going to give 40 million, put 40 million in a pocket, in a bucket, just for Inlet View, we have no wiggle room. We have no, I mean, that's just it. So what projects in our district, what would be, what would we have to triage in order to do that?
It's either everything on attachment B, which was security vestibules and other prioritized things. And it also removes any flexibility if the board were to want to wait and see how the budget development occurs over the next 2.5 months. It would remove any chance of using any of those funds to prevent the loss of something
Something.
on the February budget, because it is flexible funding and could ultimately be used for that purpose. So what it really does is takes away flexibility. If the board thought that they may have very difficult decisions to make 3 months from now, but it puts it on the timeline to be able to get Inlet View if that's the board's primary priority.
So, and I guess So for me, it seems to me that whether we make that decision on 10-4 or not, if we create, I'm all for creating that pot of money. I just need it to be more flexible.
Which,
Because the pot, if she, creating this, combining the debt service with the, but to build a new school to build a new school is going to eliminate a whole lot of other needs. I mean, it is. So I'm trying to figure out, and there'll be no flexibility because the money is there, you're putting it there for Inlet View. When we close schools, if we combine 6, 7, 8, whatever we decide to do with the 2024 budget, I don't know what that is, but I need that information before I can decide on how to spend the leftover money, is what I'm saying.
Member Wilson and Member Jacobs.
right,
And it may be that we can afford, that we can do Inlet View, but it may be that we can't. So I don't know. I don't know what the impact of, because we're looking at, it's just odd to me that we're spending, and which we should spend the money, but we are also looking at a deficit. And so, and there's nothing that says we can't save some of this money for the deficit. But I understand that our capital needs are great. I do. And I want Inlet View to have a school. I'm missing some key pieces in what we do for the 2024 budget is gonna, to me, will influence how I would want to see this money spent. That's all I'm saying. And it may just be my own thinking.
I'm in support of the language, the second bullet point, the allocation of the ASD capital project funds. Which I stated prior is because we're in Alaska, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So just to have that flexibility just in case.
And it could be that once we get through, I just need some more information. We're on the path to get to where we want to be. So if we can hold back some money, but it has to be money that we can, I mean, Ursa Major may come in at $10 million. Then we've already obligated ourselves to just one project. So I don't, it's a struggle, but I just can't see pigeonholing money for a single purpose when we have so many question marks as to how we're going to even build a 2024 budget.
I'm gonna, Member Jacobs, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to stress that, circle back to something I mentioned earlier, which is the next 2-3 months in particular.
Louder.
Sorry, the next few months in particular, for those on the phone, are going to be extremely challenging. And Mr. Anderson has stressed multiple times, administration stressed multiple times, that we don't need to have this entire conversation right now. The second bullet point is kind of a nod to that. Does the board value prioritizing families that are going to be impacted by what we're going to be briefed on in the next 30 to 45 days? The answer to that should be yes. I think if we're looking for how to modify this based on, it sounds like I'm hearing Member Lessons, Member Higgins expressed desire to further prioritize Inlet View. Of course, I think, again, we're coming from the standpoint that this board has already taken significant steps to prioritize Inlet View. But what I think I'm hearing is that there's a desire to do that and remove making the bond and service amount whole. My suggestion is to have that conversation at a later date and perhaps remove that line item, move that into the second bullet point under the 25, what is currently 25 million or so, and then maybe we move forward with passing around that looks like that. But before we make such a significant change to what's presented, although 2 of the 3 members can make a vote, my suggestion is we do an informal straw poll, since as far as I know, 6 of the 7 board members are still here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, maybe let's follow that suggestion to take a straw poll among the 6 remaining members. Member Donnelly, I know that you're still on the phone. Nope.
Oh, no, here.
Yes, okay, excellent. May I ask how many of you would support essentially the second bullet point, the expanded bullet point, allocating remaining funds, the 25.8 million
Let's say that.
and the 11.8 towards for the reallocation following the FY24 budget passage?
I mean, that's, I would, that,
You support
I would
that?
support that. For right now, we can always come back. It doesn't have, I mean, we have time, but I'm missing a whole discussion, but
Member Holloman, Member Jacobs, Member Donnelly,
I have a pick for the first bullet point.
the first bullet point, okay. Member Jacobs, where do you stand?
If we're already assuming the board's agreed to strip out the debt service and repay, make that fund whole,
Mhm.
which I don't agree with, removing those funds to be clear, then I believe flexibility is most appropriate in terms of how we accomplish such a significant capital project.
Option 2. Member Donnelly, where do you stand on this? Star 6 to unmute.
so, but we have not decided to totally remove the 11 million yet, right? I mean, we have
Well,
not-
this is suggesting that
This
we
is-
move the 11 million towards a larger pot of money to ultimately remain flexible pending passage of an FY24 budget. To combine the 11.8 and the 25.8.
Should be both answer.
Member
Member
Donnelly?
Donnelly? Is his lips moving?
He switched
Oh, he did.
and I have him as a panelist and it shows he's unmuted, so I'm not sure.
Could we just give them a call? Doesn't matter.
Absolutely. I can do that right now.
This is Dave Donnelly. I didn't know that you could leave a message.
Oh, well, we gave it a good
Take that
try.
as a yes.
So unclear about Member Donnelly. So my informal tally suggests that there is a split among board members in support of an inlet view allocation, which would allow an earlier project build, and those who would be focused on reallocating funds following passage of the FY24 budget. I think for the sake of not knowing Member Donnelly's perspective and knowing that Member Higgins is not here right now, I think it's reasonable to send a recommend, and I would ask for your support in sending a recommendation from the Finance Committee in support of the Capital Projects Fund option. Oh, okay, great. Member Donnelly, are you online? Oh,
Yeah, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. You're,
I'll do that. I can do it.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out to me because I was having to try both by phone and by Zoom to connect. Yeah, I agree with as you just laid it out, Madam Chair, that we should move forward with it as it appears in the proposal that's before us, to have it go into the capital projects, because I agree with President Bellamy that I'm concerned if we used all the money at one
Thank you so much, and I'm glad we were able to connect. Okay, I will redraft. It is 20 minutes after the end of this meeting. I'm going to redraft a memo, get the finance committee members' approval and send it to Amanda as a recommendation from the finance committee. We didn't really directly discuss the backlog of minor maintenance. But Rob, are you supportive of this, of the $3 million allocated here towards really addressing some of the backlog in our minor maintenance needs?
Absolutely, we could make very good use of that.
Okay, excellent.
When
Thank
there's
you.
time, I can speak on that. And
Great,
and
okay,
narrative.
and we will have more opportunities when this is up as a non-action and an action item. Great,
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just to clarify, so you are creating one pot of money by moving the 11.8 million.
to the
So
25.
why are we doing that now?
In order to remain flexible. I think that was a key concern among a number of board members. And I don't know that there was overwhelming support for allocating it towards taxpayer relief, when we can think about taxpayer relief more
In a different
broadly
way, yeah.
through
okay.
stewardship of our resources, through possibly not offering a bond in 2023. So this just makes one larger, more flexible pool of money that we would then address following passage
Taxes
of
up to
FY
2024.
24 budget.
Madam Chair, if I might, to member, to President Bellamy point, this could be further reallocated, so we could resume this conversation
Okay.
later.
Yes, but this is just to bring a
I mean,
recommendation to
And I
the
know, we
commit,
just
to the
getting
board.
started. It's gonna be, but anyway, yeah, it's tough.
Okay, all right, thank you. I will
Thank
entertain a
you.
motion
Good
to
meeting.
adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Great, thank you all so much for your time and participation.
Sorry. When is the next meeting?
Oh, the next meeting in about
It's
a
on the
month.
agenda, October 12th. I see.
Yeah, October 12th.
But we will have discussions at our next, all our work sessions.
Yes.
Budget.
Governance and communications in October.
The communications next week.
Yeah, I know, but I was
Oh, I'm
thinking
sorry.
October, it's an early release day, that Thursday. And I'm just wondering if we